Welcome to today's lesson. We are still in the book of Daniel, reason being that there's so much good stuff in there to tell, and we want to cover it all, or at least as much as we can. So today we're picking up at a point where we are no longer talking about Nebuchadnezzar when he was alive. So that's a good change, but there's stuff that Nebuchadnezzar did that comes into play in this story, and that's what we'll get into. So, here's the situation is that at some point Nebuchadnezzar died. Daniel was still alive, but it seems that as things changed, the new king took over, and then the king following him was coming along, that they decided to move Daniel out of his high position in helping rule the country or advising the king and move him out. Now, that's not unusual. Uh, with our presidents, when a new president comes in, he will take people he likes and put them in certain jobs so that he knows he has somebody he can trust. And the people who had those jobs before, well, they go and do something else with their lives. So they're no longer working in that capacity. They may end up coming back later, but at that point, that's what happens. Now, uh, with the way it happened with another country taking over a country. A lot of times they would leave these people in place because they didn't always have somebody that they knew that they could bring in and do that job. And they want someone who could speak the language and know how things worked until they decide whether or not they were doing a good job or they had somebody else who was ready to come in. So that's a little bit of the difference of how it worked. So in this case, we have a guy named Belshazzar. And you notice his name is very similar to the one that they gave Daniel when they brought him in, which was like Belteshazzar. And the names mean very close to the same thing. But Belshazzar um, is referred to as a son of Nebuchadnezzar. Now, don't let all this confuse you because he may not actually have been the son. He could have been the grandson. He could have been married into the family. The way they would refer to ancestors back then would be his father. So uh, we now have lots of different names for different types of relatives, and then they had fewer. So your own father might be called father, your grandfather you might call father. And actually, that's not too unusual now because we called my grandmother mother because when the first grandchild was born, her youngest daughter was still in the home and calling her mother mother. So my brother also called her mother. So that's kind of neat how that works out. But don't let all of that confuse you. In the Bible, when they're talking about someone's the son of, it could be grandson. Same way if they're talking about the father, it could be the grandfather. So Belshazzar is having a party. Now, as we find out later on historically, because there's really a lot of stuff that's not mentioned in the Bible that we do know from things that have been found there, because as I mentioned last time, there's lots of archaeological stuff around Babylon that's been dug up, is that the Medes and the Persians, another country, actually another empire, was pressing in and they wanted to take over Babylon. Well, at this time, apparently Belshazzar decided to have a party and didn't think that there was any danger, at least immediate danger, from the Medes and the Persians. So he's having the party, and historically, Nebuchadnezzar had been known for taking the empire to its great height, and he was the one who had captured Jerusalem. Um, that having happened because the people had not been following God. The Israelites, his favored people, had not been following him, and so he allowed this to happen. This was punishment for that. And a lot of the survivors were taken off to Babylon, which included Daniel. Uh, One of the other things that happened way back then was that when Nebuchadnezzar took over, they took all of these things out of God's temple, things that had been designated for specific jobs and the way they were supposed to be used in worshiping God. Well, they took all of that and put it in their treasury and burned down the temple. So pretty much the only thing that's left as far as the temple's concerned is whatever it was built on, and which was not part of the building, and these items that had been taken back. Well, the big party's going on, and Belshazzar has tons of people there. And he has his wives are there, and his girlfriends were there. And yes, he had lots of wives and lots of girlfriends too. Not really a good idea, but that's the way things often happened back then. And he had all of these guys from all over Babylon, the Empire of Babylon, were there, and they are celebrating, and he's passing around the wine and all that, and they need more drinking cups, and so he goes and has them bring out all of this gold and silver in the form of cups that had been taken from God's temple. Well, um, not a good idea. God doesn't like that. And while Belshazzar is there watching, he sees this hand appear in the air, just the hand, and is writing on the wall. It writes these words, 4 words, and he gets scared. Not surprising, I would too. And you may have seen in cartoons when people get scared that it'll show their knees shaking and they're and hitting together and their legs are all wobbly. And I'll tell you, that really does happen. You get scared enough and it's hard to stand up or even walk. And so that happens to him. Well, it says that the queen comes in, um, but she is needed at this point because he has already asked astrologers, the enchanters, all this same kind of guys we've heard before. What does this mean? Because they would actually have been able to read the words, but it didn't mean anything to them. They'd just go, okay, it doesn't make sense. It would be sort of like somebody going horse, cow, bird, star to us, and we'd go, okay, 4 words. I don't, I can read the words, but I don't know what you mean by that. And in this case, these guys have come in, and he can't figure it out. They can't figure it out. Uh, the Queen Mother comes in about the time that he has said, "Okay, someone who can tell what this means, I will clothe them in purple. I will put a gold chain around his neck and make him the third highest ruler in the kingdom. Nobody can do it." She says, back in the days of Nebuchadnezzar, he had this fellow working for him named Daniel, and he knew this kind of stuff. He could solve riddles, he could interpret dreams, and he did that for your father Nebuchadnezzar. And they said, "Oh, go call him in." So by the time Daniel gets there, Belshazzar, who's apparently never heard of Daniel, suddenly knows a lot about Daniel. So I imagine during this time, he was asking the Queen Mother and his advisors, "Who is this Daniel guy? Tell me about him." So when Daniel shows up, he's able to say, "Oh, Daniel, I've heard that you can interpret dreams and solve riddles and that sort of thing. And could you take care of this one for me? And if you do, I can clothe you in purple and give you a gold chain and make you third highest ruler in the kingdom." Well, you can understand why somebody might like a gold chain. Okay, that's valuable. Third highest ruler in the kingdom. That's pretty good, especially if, as I suspect, Daniel had been taken out of his ruling position earlier. Okay, that might appeal to some people to be put back in charge of a lot of things. And the third thing, though, clothed in purple. What's with that? Well, nowadays, we can get clothing in purple. We can get hats. We can get shirts that are purple. Um, Back then, you could get things in purple, but it was extremely expensive. They just didn't have the dyes like we have now. And there was some sea creature that could make a little bit of purple, and they would use that to dye things, and it'd take a lot of those. And uh, so it cost so much money, only the richest people could wear purple. And Daniel gets right down to it. It's almost like he's irritated at this point, and he says, "No, no, you can give that to other people. I'll tell you what this means." And he has the words here, and he goes, "Your father Nebuchadnezzar rose up." He was a powerful man, and he could have people killed he didn't like. He could have people stay alive that he did like. And his rule was law. And the God of the universe put him there. And when Nebuchadnezzar got too high and mighty, this God also brought him down, so he was eating grass and standing out in the rain. And you may remember this from our last lesson. And he goes, but you didn't learn from this, and you have a party, and you start using the cups from this God's temple for your party without even thinking that you might anger God. So here's what God's message is for you. He's measured the days of your being the king, and they have come to an end. He's weighed you in what you have done with your life, and you've come up short. Your kingdom is going to be given to the Medes and the Persians. Well, of course, Belshazzar is terrified, but he does one thing that shows a little bit of character in him. He goes ahead and clothes Daniel in purple. He puts the gold chain on him and makes him third highest ruler in the kingdom. And that's about the last thing he does, because that very night, the Medes and the Persians broke into Babylon with their troops, and Belshazzar was killed. He didn't make it through the night. So there are a couple of things we can learn from this is that, even with some of God's rules being set up a long time ago, we need to continue following them. Just because he may not on a given day decide to enforce the effects of us breaking his rules, that doesn't mean that he can't do it at any time he wants. Um, the other is sticking with Daniel, and he's willing to speak the truth. That's a valuable thing to do. In some ways, he was blunt. He was not disrespectful. He just said the way things were. So that's something we can learn from him as well, and learn from his example. Now, one thing I want to leave with you, you notice my tie really doesn't match my shirt. But I wanted to wear the shirt because it's purple, and I thought that would fit with the lesson. The other thing is the tie came the closest to representing the lesson. Now, if you ignore the Pillsbury Doughman, you'll see here that there's a hand all by itself. It's almost like it could be writing, but you'll see there are words written all around the Pillsbury Doughboy. And I thought, this is the closest thing I'm going to have to a hand writing on the wall. So I'm going to leave this with you and hope you have learned something from the lesson. And I also hope that you can be back for the next one. And I will talk to you then. Bye.